To the program. I'm all of a sudden discombobulated here as we get started. The phone number is 877-97 Eric 877-973-7425. I want to, out of the gate this morning, I just want to give a shout out to someone. I don't know who they are. I have no idea. I went to my local Chick-fil-A today and was parked waiting for them. I decided I would go inside and pick up my order and sat in the parking lot, did the little app waiting for it, and you could smell someone smoking something. I'm actually really impressed with the guy who rolled down his window for the girl in the drive-thru to take his order, and the fog of weed smoke came rolling forth from his window to the extent that the poor girl started choking on the smell. I'm sure she's high as a kite right now. It's 8:00 in the morning. What the hell are you doing? Oh my gosh. We live in a fallen world and falling is a choice. Oh my gosh. I don't know, folks. I don't know. We live in a fallen world. At least Macon, Georgia. Wow. I got to admit, I was a little impressed. All right, we can move on now. Here is Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska. This is a relevant story this morning.
Madam President, I rise today on the Senate floor to call for the resignation of John Kerry as a member of the Biden administration's National Security Council. Now, Madam President, I don't do this lightly. As a matter of fact, in my entire time in the Senate, I've never called for anyone's resignation. Obama-Biden administration, Trump administration, Biden administration now. Trust me, I've been tempted, particularly when some in government have tried to hurt my state. A lot of that's going on right now with the Biden administration. But his record, John Kerry's record of undermining working families and working against American national security interests is too much to bear. He needs to go.
Yeah. John Kerry needs to go. If you haven't heard, John Kerry, it appears, may have been leaking to the Iranians Israeli security information. Now, this is a larger story. Mohammad Javad Zarif is the Iranian foreign minister. He was recorded in a series of conversations with someone writing a book on essentially the history of the current political regime in Iran, of which he has long been a part. And it was a multi-hour conversation, and the recording was leaked. It appears it was leaked against the wishes of both Zarif and the author who was recording the conversation. Someone got a hold of the tapes and leaked it to an anti-Iran publication in Europe. Among other things, Zarif talks about Qasem Soleimani undermining his deal with the Obama administration on nukes. He talks about Soleimani making the situation worse in the Middle East, doing things he should not have done, collaborating with the Russians. Essentially, he acknowledged that the Iranian political apparatus is subservient to the military and the supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei, that his hands are tied and his foreign policy is done in service of the military instead of the military in service of the foreign policy. But along the way, and it's very interesting here, it's a 30-paragraph story in the New York Times. And in the 24th of 30 paragraphs, there is a single sentence. 28 paragraphs. The 24th of 28 paragraphs. There's a single sentence paragraph. Former Secretary of State John Kerry informed Zarif that Israel had attacked Iranian interests in Syria at least 200 times, to his astonishment, Mr. Zarif said. What's very interesting is the Washington Post ran the story and did not even mention the John Kerry leaks. Mike Pompeo, the former Secretary of State, and Republican foreign policy leaders in Congress are demanding a formal investigation into John Kerry following revelations he informed Iranian leaders about covert Israeli military operations. A leaked audio recording, this is from the Washington Free Beacon, of Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, who worked closely with Kerry when the 2015 nuclear accord was negotiated, catches the Iranian official claiming the former Obama administration Secretary of State informed him about at least 200 Israeli strikes on Iranian military positions in Syria, that Kerry shared these intimate details to his astonishment, according to the New York Times, suggests Kerry may have been disclosing classified information. It would also represent a stunning betrayal of America's closest Middle East ally. Israel relies on the United States to protect shared intelligence from its top regional enemy. The revelation is already generating calls for Kerry, the special presidential envoy for climate, to resign from the Biden administration and face a congressional investigation for possibly spilling highly classified secrets to one of America's leading enemies. Former Trump administration Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the audio tape proves what I've said for years, that Zarif continues to engage with Kerry on policy matters after Kerry's public service, and according to Zarif, Kerry informed the Iranians of Israeli operations. Before we cut a deal with Iran that reduces American security, it would be good to know what the arrangement, if any, may have been between these two leaders. Jim Banks, Republican from Indiana, member of the House Armed Services Committee, said John Kerry must resign immediately. Tom Cotton, as well, called on Kerry to resign. Darrell Issa of California, member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, echoed calls for an investigation and promised to hold Kerry accountable. Banks, Jim Banks, who's been leading Republican efforts to prevent the Biden administration from unwinding tough sanctions on Iran as it negotiates a new nuclear deal, further said any investigation into Kerry's conversations with Iran would seek to find out if other officials from the Obama or Biden administrations revealed similar information to Tehran. Now, the Biden team, the Kerry team, John Kerry says he didn't leak any information, but Kerry's spokesman separately says everything he said was public knowledge. That it doesn't mean that sounds like their stories are not on the same page, and this is deeply problematic. Josh Hammer, a friend of mine, writes in the New York Post. He's one of the editorial page editors at he's the opinion editor for Newsweek. He's a research fellow for the Edmund Burke Foundation. He has a piece in the New York Post. We should meditate on Josh Hammer's piece here. The rather curious defining feature of Democratic Party foreign policy, going back at least 4 decades, is that our friends must be bullied and our enemies must be appeased. The Democrat worldview holds that America is a source of geopolitical evil whose destructive influences must be tamed and reined in, and that America's enemies must be emboldened in order to tilt the global playing field away from America's noxious ambit. Barack Obama's administration encapsulated this toxic ideology through its single-minded pursuit of a nuclear accord with the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism during the president's lame duck second term. Many of the leading hucksters who comprised Team Obama's negotiators with Tehran, Wendy Sherman, Robert Malley, and Colin Cowell, among them, are now reprising their roles under Uncle Joe Biden's third Obama term. No individual personified the Obama bros' supine tango with the mullahs better than then Secretary of State John Kerry. Kerry, the statesman, who has been on the wrong side of every major foreign affairs issue since at least the swift boats of Vietnam, betrayed his country in borderline treasonous fashion as Obama's chief diplomatic lackey. Not content to sell the farm and scores of unmarked pallets of U.S. taxpayer cash to a malocracy with untold American blood on its hands as a diplomat, Kerry then traitorously colluded as a layman with his pal, Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, to undermine the Trump administration's maximum pressure Iran containment strategy. Alas, we now know it is apparently even worse. New leaked audio appears to reveal that Kerry, now Team Biden's special climate envoy, divulged to Zarif the details of over 200 clandestine Israeli military operations taken against Iranian targets in Syria. One might be loath to take on blind faith the claims of a thug like Zarif, but in this case, the shoe fits. This is who John Forbes Kerry is, who he always has been and always will be. And if confirmed, what an utter shambolic disgrace it is. The man who was then serving as America's leading diplomat on the global stage betrayed our Israeli allies with reckless abandon, opting instead to buttress a rogue jihadist state and its barbarous Syrian satrapy. Rational American allies the world over will respond to this perfidy by trusting the U.S. much less with sensitive military intelligence. And for what end, other than the perverse self-serving satisfaction of Team Obama's echo chamber miscreants? The American left frequently responds with bemusement or defiance when it is accused of harboring or barely concealing anti-American animus. With this latest example of the full depth of leftist anti-Israel zealotry and pro-Iran sycophancy, perhaps liberals will respond next time with less confusion. In the interim, John Kerry has helped solidify his odious legacy as a dunderhead par excellence at best and a traitorous anti-American ideologue at worst. That's Josh Hammer, writing in the New York Post. Can't say I really disagree with him. John Kerry provided Iran's regime, a regime that wants death to Israel and the United States, provided them classified information. Now, he says, or his spokesman says, it was publicly available. The information was not publicly available, by the way. Despite what they're saying, it wasn't publicly available. He provided our enemy and Israel's enemy intelligence about what Israel was doing. We only know this because the Iranian foreign minister's private conversations were leaked. Why would the Iranian foreign minister, who did not know he was being recorded, leak that John Kerry, or actually, I've got to clarify that. He did know he was recorded. He expected it to be confidential and used to help write a book. He didn't know it was going to be leaked. He repeatedly, through the conversation, insisted that he was telling this author more details than could be used publicly, but helped shape the picture of what was happening. And among those, that John Kerry provided him that information, to his astonishment. John Kerry needs to resign. The extent to which the Biden administration circles their wagons around John Kerry is going to tell you just how much they really care about our national security and the national security of our allies. If John Kerry is still involved in this administration by the end of this week, it is a big signal to the rest of the world that you can't trust this administration with its secrets. Our allies should be able to depend on the United States to protect their military secrets. John Kerry has a history of betraying this nation, and now he's betraying Israel as well. All because John Kerry thinks John Kerry knows what's best. By the way, John Kerry, you will recall, is the man who said there would never be a separate peace with Israel and other Middle Eastern allies. And when the Trump administration announced it was working on it, John Kerry was one of the first people out of the gate to say, impossible, inconceivable, it's not going to happen. And yet the Trump administration was able to deliver what John Kerry and Barack Obama never could, because he chose to think differently from them. John Kerry constantly tries to think differently than most Americans. He tries to think, what do our enemies want and how can I give it to them? The man needs to resign, if not be prosecuted for what he did.
Want to be on the show? Call Eric now at 877
Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. Man, it's actually remarkable what is going on as the left tries to build up Stacey Abrams. In the last 96 hours, Twitter, the social media giant, has allowed its employees to stack the deck in Stacey Abrams' favor, among other things. In fact, Twitter employees yesterday, in their trending topics, you can, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, with Twitter, the social media giant, you can go on and there's an Explore tab. If you click it, it shows you trending topics for your area. One of the trending topics yesterday was how Texas, Florida, and other southern Republican-led states are seeing declines in COVID, even as they've got rid of mask mandates and the like. And the Twitter employees helpfully tacked on, but some people think they're fudging the data, or some such like that. Spreading conspiracy theories from the left as a way to explain what's happening. They also used a Stacey Abrams opinion piece to claim journalists say Stacey Abrams didn't actually support boycotts in Georgia or cause Major League Baseball to move their All-Star game. Now there's this. Joseph Wolfson from Fox News has this. USA Today appeared to have brazenly allowed retroactive edits of an op-ed written by prominent Georgia Democrat Stacey Abrams in an effort to water down her previous justification for boycotts after Major League Baseball moved its All-Star game from Atlanta. In a piece published on March 31st, just days before Major League Baseball announced it was relocating the All-Star game due to backlash over Georgia's election reform bill that was signed into law, Abrams seemed to defend the national response to what she called the, quote, racist, classist legislation. Quote, the impassioned response to the racist, classist bill that is now the law in Georgia is to boycott in order to achieve change, Abrams originally wrote. She continued, events hosted by Major League Baseball, world-class soccer, college sports, and dozens of Hollywood films hang in the balance. At the same time, activists urge Georgians to swear off of hometown products to express our outrage. Until we hear clear, unequivocal statements that show Georgia-based companies get what's at stake, I can't argue with an individual's choice to opt for their competition. Then she continued, however, one lesson of boycotts is that the pain of deprivation must be shared to be sustainable. Otherwise, those least resilient bear the brunt of these actions, and in the aftermath, they struggle to access the victory. And boycotts are complicated affairs that require a long-term commitment to action. I have no doubt the voters of color, particularly black voters, are willing to endure the hardships of boycotts, but I don't think that's necessary yet. I ask you to bring your business to Georgia, and if you're already here, stay and fight, stay and vote. The article was updated April 6th, but her commentary went through a real transformation. Her revised op-ed adds, instead of a boycott, I strongly urge other events and productions to do business in Georgia and speak out against our law and similar proposals in other states. Now, Matt Whitlock, a Republican strategist, was the first to sound the alarm over the stealth edits that were made to Abrams' op-ed, which was being cited by media outlets fact-checking Republicans. In a March 31st op-ed in USA Today, Abrams wrote that the advancement of civil rights relied on economic boycotts, but cautioned there's a downside. Boycotts invariably also cost jobs. To be sustainable, the pain of deprivation must be shared rather than borne by those who are the least resilient. They also require long-term commitment to action. PolitiFact wrongly claimed, Abrams said in the original op-ed, not over the fact that Stacey Abrams published an op-ed about the Georgia law saying boycotts work, and she wouldn't blame anyone for boycotting. Then after the Major League Baseball move, USA Today stealth edited the op-ed with stronger language opposing boycotts, and now the media is using the stronger language from the edited op-ed to say Stacey Abrams never supported boycotts. And then Twitter used the fact check with Abrams' own op-ed to show Abrams didn't support boycotts, when in fact Abrams actually did support boycotts. It's remarkable. Do you get what happened? Stacey Abrams writes an op-ed and says, I can't blame you if I don't think you should boycott, but I can't blame you if you do. And now USA Today has edited it to say no one should boycott. They should continue to bring their business to Georgia and pressure. The fact checkers from CNN and PolitiFact are using the revised op-ed and not the original op-ed. The original op-ed was published before Major League Baseball left, saying she couldn't blame them if they left. And then was changed after they left to say no one should leave Georgia. The media is protecting Stacey Abrams. It is a national effort to get the woman elected in Georgia. It is a national effort to shape Georgia's political climate.
15.
Part of the problem, of course, is there were some Republicans who want to get her elected as well, just to spite Brian Kemp. We'll get into that in a little while. Hello there, it is Erick Erickson here. The phone number, should you wish to be a part of this here program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Friends, they've denied it. They've said it's not going to happen. Fox News has walked back its story about the banning burgers. You know, the Biden team allegedly was going to ban burgers. John Roberts from Fox has had to walk that story back a little bit because it's not really true. I'm sure you're familiar with the story now that the Biden administration was going to crack down on burgers. Well,
or the retreat. On Friday, we told you about a study from the University of Michigan to give some perspective on President Biden's ambitious climate change goals. That research from 2020 found that cutting back how much red meat people eat would have a drastic impact on harmful greenhouse gas emissions. The data was accurate, but a graphic and a script incorrectly implied that it was part of Biden's plan for dealing with climate change. That is not the case.
That is not the case. The Biden proposal does not yet ban burgers, but, you know, we're grown-ups here, aren't we? We know how things work. The Biden administration has not proposed a formal plan to ban beef. They have not submitted anything. Now, it's been well advertised on the right that the Biden administration is going to ban beef as part of their climate change goals. It came from a study at the University of Michigan showing if you wanted to meet the goals the Biden administration was going to propose based on their campaign plan, which they're now doing, one of the ways to do it is to ban cows because cows are bad for the environment. So get rid of the cows, stop people from eating meat, reduce your burgers to once a month, and you'll help meet the goals. Now, the Biden administration came out and said, no, it's not in our plan. It's not in our plan. But we know how this works. We know how this works. The left and the right both do these sorts of things. It's not a partisan statement to say both sides signal. Both sides signal, both sides make announcements. So the Biden administration is saying, no, we're not doing it. But we've known for a while now the left has become anti-cow because they believe cows are polluting. They're moving towards the Beyond Meat and the Impossible Burger, the highly processed vegetarian replacements for burgers. They're getting fast food restaurants to put them in the fast food restaurants after years of telling us to minimize our highly processed food intake. They want us to eat highly processed synthetic hemoglobin-contained synthetic meats. They don't have to formally ban it for the left to get the signal that the left, including the media in this country, is required to change the conversation. Years ago, it was global warming, but every time they had a global warming summit, there was a blizzard, so they've changed it now to climate change. And now, helpfully, thanks to changing the label to climate change, anytime something happens with the climate, they can say it's because of the climate change situation that is leading to global warming. We now know, for example, that the wildfires in California last year really weren't a product of extreme climate change. There were other factors involved. We've had hurricanes for years. We went through a lull for a number of years, and now that they're back, every time we have a hurricane, it's climate change, even though for years we had hurricane after hurricane after hurricane. Well, all they've got to do is signal to the left what to do. They don't actually have to make it formal policy, and they're going to get what they want. Well, as a case in point, Epicurious, the planet on the plate. Why Epicurious left beef behind. This was published yesterday. For any person or publication wanting to envision a more sustainable way to cook, cutting out beef is a worthwhile first step. Almost 15% of greenhouse gas emissions globally come from livestock and everything involved in raising it. 61% of those emissions can be traced back to beef. Cows are 20 times less efficient to raise than beans, and roughly 3 times less efficient than poultry and pork. It might not feel like much, but cutting out just a single ingredient, beef, can have an outsized impact on making a person's cooking more environmentally friendly. Today, Epicurious announces that we've done just that. We've cut out beef. Beef won't appear in new Epicurious recipes, articles, or newsletters. It will not show up on our homepage. It will be absent from our Instagram feed. We know that some people might assume that this decision signals some sort of vendetta against cows or the people who eat them. But this decision was not made because we hate burgers. We don't. Instead, our shift is solely about sustainability, about not giving airtime to one of the world's worst climate offenders. We think of this decision as not anti-beef, but rather pro-planet. Of course, when it comes to the planet, eschewing beef is not a silver bullet. All ruminant animals like sheep and goats have significant environmental costs, and there are problems with chicken, seafood, soy, and almost every other ingredient. In a food system so broken, almost no choice is perfect. And yet we know the home cooks want to do better. We know because we actually pulled the plug on beef well over a year ago, and our readers have rallied around the recipes we published in beef's place. For every burger recipe we didn't publish, we put a vegetarian recipe into the world instead. Rather than articles about ground beef, we talked about alt meats from brands like Light Life, a sponsor of this collection of recipes. And last summer, when America's annual grilling holiday rolled around, we set our fire on cauliflower and mushrooms, not steak and hot dogs. The traffic and engagement numbers on the stories don't lie. When given an alternative to beef, American cooks get hungry. Why announce our decision now? While beef consumption in the U.S. is significantly down from where it was 30 years ago, it has been slowly creeping up in the past few years. The conversation about sustainable cooking clearly needs to be louder. This policy is our contribution to this conversation. Addressing climate change requires legislation, international cooperation, and buy-in from the corporate sector. Individual actions like choosing alt meats or mushrooms or chickpeas instead of the real thing can feel so small they're essentially pointless. But every time you abstain from beef at the grocery store or a restaurant, you send a signal to the grocery store, yes, but also and perhaps more influentially, to whomever you talk to about your decision. Our announcement today is simply us loudly and proudly letting you, the home cook, know about a step we're taking. Admittedly, we're hoping the rest of American food media joins us as well. Listen, God bless Epicurious. It's ironic they talk about their traffic. They've done this for a year now. They're only now admitting what they've done. I haven't been to Epicurious in more than a year. Epicurious used to have a magazine. I don't think that they still have a magazine. They've kind of ran the thing into the ground years ago. It used to kind of be one of the places you could go for a lot of original takes on recipes and good recipes. And over the years, it's just gotten very pretentious in what it cooks. It's just not what it used to be. It was a magazine that at times provided people, along with Gourmet and Bon Appetit, interesting ways to cook and to stand out. But it kind of lost its focus at some point. And its cookbook, well, you know, I collect cookbooks, and it's just wasn't a great cookbook. And, you know, God bless them. If they want to be a non-beef alternative, it's their choice. I don't criticize them, and I don't condemn them. But I do want you to understand where this is headed. The left has decided that you're not supposed to eat beef anymore. They want to kill the steakhouse. They're perfectly fine putting those people out of work because those people are polluting the environment. Epicurious has made a choice. Now, what I find so notable here is that while they're claiming that they're not going to publish beef recipes and that they haven't done it for a year and that their traffic demands it, I have not heard anybody talk about Epicurious in a very long time. And my suspicion is this is them trying to virtue signal to the left that, hey, come back to us now. We're environmentally friendly, unlike Bon Appetit. There's a big Bon Appetit is a competitor, I think in-house owned by the same company, but a competitor that they are not sufficiently woke. They've had a series of purges over wokeism and cancel culture. They had a great editor who apparently at one point years ago dressed as a Puerto Rican, and he's not, and he had to be fired. But he was actually a very good editor of the magazine. And he wasn't woke enough, so he had to be fired. And Epicurious is now, hey, we're the woke ones. We're the woke ones. We hadn't done beef in a year. You got no beef with us. Come to us. Who the hell cares? I mean, honestly, let them do it. Don't be mad at them. I see a lot of scoffing about Epicurious. They haven't had a beef recipe in a year. They're only now being public about it. The thing here, though, is what's happening is that it's virtue signaling. They haven't done it in a year. They didn't need to tell anyone they hadn't done it. But now they're trying to be woke and wave the flag and tell everyone else, hey, you need to be like us. I will go continue my beef recipes. In fact, I guess I'm going to have to send out a beef recipe this week to my recipe list. If you want on the recipe list, text the word recipe to 33777. What will happen is you'll get back a link. Click the link, and you can sign up your email address, and you will get added to the recipe list. But you gotta go do it. You gotta go text the word recipe to 33777. I'll send out a good beef recipe this week, since goodness knows Epicurious isn't going to send you a beef recipe. But again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, and I don't want to drag out a segment for the sake of dragging out a segment. And I feel like I'm kind of doing that. But I need to reiterate this point. I literally have not even considered. I cook constantly. I have tons of food sites bookmarked. I haven't considered Epicurious a place to go get a recipe in more than a year since before they scrapped the beef. I had completely forgot. It was out of my mind. And now suddenly today it's on the front page. And really, I think that's what's going on here is they're trying to tell everyone that they're relevant and they're woke. Please bring your traffic to us. As Condé Nast starts putting stuff on the chopping block, they're trying to save themselves by trying to signal their virtuousness and commitment to climate change, but also now trying to get the wokes to go after everyone else so that the mob will go to Food Network and say, why are you doing beef recipes? Do you really think the Pioneer Woman is going to give up beef recipes? Her husband's a cattle farmer. When are they going to cancel the Pioneer Woman? And they're not. She's wonderful. There's no reason to cancel the Pioneer Woman. And also, we should be able to have a choice. But I get the sense from the wokes that they don't want us to have a choice. I mean, you got Epicurious saying they want other food outlets, food publications to follow their lead. There will always be beef and farmers, and the beef industry, frankly, has a great advertising, or they used to. They can bring the advertising campaign back. There's always going to be a steakhouse, we should hope. The government isn't going to shut them down. And I honest to goodness think that this actually hurts the Democrats to have this level of virtue signaling, that the Democrats say, we're not coming to ban your beef, and then you've got the wokes out there trying to pressure everyone into getting rid of beef. It kind of is a counterintuitive message. And the bottom line is people understand Biden can come out and say, I'm not going to ban your beef, but when he sicks the woke horde on everyone to ban beef, they're going to blame him.
Want to be on the show? Call Eric now at 8
Hi there, it is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Speaking of steak and beef, you should support Omaha Steaks. Support the beef producers. Support the people who sell the beef. Just because Epicurious doesn't want to give you recipes doesn't mean there aren't some great ones out there. And you know, you can go to omahasteaks.com and find all that stuff and get a great deal, particularly with Mother's Day coming up. It's the perfect time to have your family around the table for steak and burgers. And you can get it with the Let's Go Grill package at Omaha Steaks. What you do is you go to omahasteaks.com and you put Georgia in the search bar. And then you can order the Let's Go Grill package. When Mother's Day rolls around in a couple weeks, you can have your family over. You can grill steak. You got pork chops. You got chicken breasts. You got almost 4 pounds of free burgers. Yeah, let me say that one again. You get 12 burgers for free with this package. That's almost 4 pounds of hamburgers from Omaha Steaks, completely free. You also get $20 off your first order. If you hadn't ordered before, go to omahasteaks.com today. Put Georgia in the search bar, Georgia, and you will get their Let's Go Grill package. You can cook a meal for mom. You can have tasty steak. Own the libs by having steak. But it's good. It's good. It's their butcher cut fillets, and their burgers are fantastic. Whether you got a Blackstone or a grill, whatever, they're fantastic. Go to omahasteaks.com today. Put Georgia in the search bar. Get this great deal. The hit was already scheduled there. I didn't realize that in talking about the Epicurious thing. But there you have it. All right. Keith Ellison is under fire today. Keith Ellison was it the Muslim congressman, left-wing, super woke Muslim congressman from Minnesota. He's now the Attorney General of Minnesota. And the wokes are now coming for Keith Ellison because he said something that the wokes really don't like because they know it to be true and he says it's not.
Was this a hate crime?
I wouldn't call it that because hate crimes are crimes where there's an explicit motive and of bias. We don't have any evidence that Derek Chauvin factored in George Floyd's race as he did what he did.
You could have charged him with a hate crime under Minnesota law, and you chose not to.
Could have, but we only charge those crimes that we had evidence that we could put in front of a jury to prove. If we'd have had a witness that told us that Derek Chauvin made a racial reference, we might have charged him with a hate crime, but I would have needed a witness to say that on the stand. We didn't have it, so we didn't do it.
What? There's no hate crime? There's no hate crime? What? There's no evidence that it was because George Floyd was black. This is like a by faith belief from the left that Derek Chauvin did it because George Floyd was black. He wouldn't have done it to a white man. How many people did you hear say that? He wouldn't have done it if Floyd was a white guy. Well, weird. Weird that suddenly there's no evidence. Now that he's been found guilty, now we can know this. Of course, there was never evidence. There never was. It was just a by faith belief, total by faith belief from the left that it was obviously a hate crime. Obviously, it was because he was Floyd was black. But nope, turns out no evidence of that at all. Well, now we got to move on. The CDC has their summer camp guidelines out. This is ridiculous. Basically, they want all the kids to be wearing masks at summer camp this summer. Oh, and now 3 feet of physical distance between campers in the same cohort, except when eating and drinking, then at least 6 feet. 6 feet physical difference between distance between campers and staff. 6 feet between campers in a different group of campers. They're just complicating it. Here's the thing. We know overwhelmingly that if a kid gets COVID-19, they're going to be fine. They're probably not even going to have symptoms. And the CDC is just trying to complicate summer camp now. Lena Wynn, who was the Planned Parenthood director for a while, she's now left because she thought that they should be more than just about abortion. She was on CNN talking to Anderson Cooper about the outdoor mask mandate and why they need to get rid of it. Listen to part of this conversation.
The problem with that, though, is there's plenty of people who aren't wearing masks anyway who haven't been vaccinated. So is that a risk? I mean, if a lot of vaccinated people are walking around without masks, are more people just going to start taking off their masks, even whether or not they've been vaccinated? It's not like anybody's checking.
Yeah, I mean, I think, frankly, outdoor mask mandates should just go, regardless of whether you're vaccinated. There are a lot of locales and states that still have blanket mask mandates. So even if you live in a suburban area or rural area where you don't see that many people, there's still a mask mandate in place. That does not make any sense. So I actually think outdoor mask mandates can go. But I also think that we can do a lot more with specifically incentivizing vaccination, including allowing businesses to come back at full capacity if they're checking for proof of vaccination.
So, I mean, it's interesting to me that you say if wearing a mask outdoors, that there's not much point. I mean, that's essentially what you're saying. Is that, I mean, what about being close to somebody, you know, walking down the street? Isn't that a risk if they haven't been vaccinated? And even if you've been vaccinated, I mean, what's the percentage of people who are vaccinated who may get it but just get a really mild case? But even now, mild cases, aren't you seeing that down the road they can have other effects?
I think the key at this point, Anderson, is that we have to think about reducing risk, not eliminating risk, because we're just not going to be able to live like that. We are seeing major portions of this country who are not yet vaccinated who are already returning to doing everything they're doing pre-pandemic because our guidance, the public health guidance, is so disconnected from their everyday reality. Part of public health is understanding where people are and meeting them there. I think we can tell people, here are all these activities that once were high risk, get vaccinated, they're now lower risk. But once you get vaccinated, go and do things. We encourage you to do things like travel. We want you to do it safely, but please go see your friends and family. I think that kind of message will have a lot more resonance than here are all the things you can't do, even if you're fully vaccinated.
Yes, and you know, Anderson probing her, pushing her there, somewhat skeptical, I think it sounded like, but she's right. I mean, she's absolutely right. Our message should be get out there and live your life, get the vaccine. Take off your mask and go live. Y'all, I've pretty much stopped wearing my mask unless I go in some place that has a sign and tells me to wear one. Why? Because I'm polite. I want to do what the business wants me to do. It's their business. But otherwise, I've been vaccinated. I'm not going to get COVID now. I'm going to go live my life. You should get the vaccine and go live your life too, and tell the CDC to leave us alone. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. Delighted to have you with me. It is 6 after the hour. My phone number, if you would like to be a part of this here program, is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. I went to a Braves game last night. I did not boycott the Braves. I went to a Braves game. It was a very difficult, very, very difficult situation because I'm a Cubs fan, and I'm a Braves fan, and they played each other. And my rule of thumb is to root for whichever team is the city they're playing in. So if they play in Chicago, I root for the Cubs. If they're playing in Atlanta, I root for the Braves. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I rooted for the Braves last night. Wow. Although the Cubbies, they tried to come back. I was there for the Freddie Freeman home run that turned that game around. For a minute there, I thought the Cubs were going to win. I got a buddy of mine who is a diehard Cubs fan, and he texted me as the game was beginning and saying, you better root for the Braves anyway, because we suck this year. And they almost pulled it out. It was 8-7. I got to tell you, though, I got there. You got to wear your mask when you go in, and then I got to my seat, and I took off my mask. It was outside. I was vaccinated. There's no reason. There's no reason to do it. Why? It was a great game. I had a great time. My buddy Jason Pye, some of you may know Jace. He worked at Freedom Works for years. Has moved to a new job up in DC, but he lives here in Georgia. And we hadn't seen each other in person in a while, and we wanted to hang out. Had a few beers, watched the game, got something to eat. Oh my gosh. I've reached this point in my life where it's hard to go in public now. I had one drunk woman come up and want a selfie. Didn't even ask, just came up and stood next to me and took her picture. The guy in front of me recognized my voice. It was somewhat awkward, but it was fun. Man, it was nice. Just to go hang out at the stadium, watch the game, have a good time with friends. It was nice. It was nice. Now, we must move on. Turns out that Republicans are having a pretty good go of it in the census. 6 states are going to gain House seats. 7 states are going to lose House seats. According to The Hill, 6 states will see their congressional delegations grow in the next Congress, while 7 states will each lose a seat. According to the first results from the U.S. Census Bureau's decennial survey of the American population, Texas is set to add 2 U.S. House seats to its delegation after a decade in which the state added more than 4 million new residents. Colorado, Florida, North Carolina, and Oregon will each add 1 more seat. Montana is going to get an additional district, its second in total, coming 30 years after it lost the second seat in the previous round of apportionment. The states losing seats are almost all in the Rust Belt. Illinois, New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania will all lose single seats. West Virginia will lose a seat, lowering its congressional delegation to 2 seats, beginning in the next Congress. For the first time since it joined the Union, California's congressional delegation will shrink by 1 seat. The new figure represents some of the weakest population growth in American history. The U.S. population grew to 331.5 million residents as of April 1st, 2020, a 7.4% increase over the population in 2010, a slower growth rate than in any other decade except the 1930s. Now, part of that may be that people were undercounted because of the pandemic. That is possible. Remember, it is a physical, actual human count in the census. Now, David Mark over at the Washington Examiner has this. Texas is getting 2 new House seats, Florida 1, helping Republican chances of winning a majority in 2022 and scrambling the Electoral College calculus for both parties in the 2024 presidential race. Population growth is driving the increased House representation for the 2 Sunbelt states in the 435-member House of Representatives, per data released by the Census Bureau. In addition to pickups for Texas and Florida, Colorado, Montana, North Carolina, and Oregon are each getting an additional. But population growth in one area usually coincides with people moving out of other states. So 7 states lose: California, Illinois, Michigan, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. The Texas population boom will boost its House membership from 36 to 38 members. The Florida delegation grows from 27 to 28 members. That's generally good news for Republicans because state-level lawmakers control the redistricting process. In Texas, Republicans are likely to draw at least 2 new seats where they have a strong chance of winning, and possibly a 4th by divvying up districts currently held by Democrats. The Rio Grande Valley in South Texas along the U.S.-Mexico border is a particularly inviting target because in 2020, then President Donald Trump made significant gains with Latino voters there while losing nationwide to Joe Biden. In Florida, political momentum is already with Republicans who nabbed 2 House seats in 2020 after holding the governor's mansion and picking up Senate seat in 2018. Still, nothing is certain in redistricting, and an extreme partisan gerrymander can ultimately backfire. Democrats see Texas as a viable political target in the coming years. After decades as a GOP stronghold, the growth of suburban voters in Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and other urban areas suggests the state could become politically competitive. In the short term, though, the new seats give House Republicans an edge in their bid to win a majority in 2022. Also, it is worth noting in the Electoral College, Texas will now have 40 Electoral College votes, and Florida will have 30, making them second and third behind California. This may force a Democratic ticket in 2024 to give a harder look at trying to play in Texas, where demographics are shifting the party's way. Although, is it really? Because in 2020, Texas pretty decisively held ground for the GOP. Remember, Democrats had targeted 10 seats in Texas in 2020. They lost all of them. So things really didn't go their way in Texas. Now, Aaron Blake at the Washington Post has a couple of takeaways here. One is Minnesota avoided losing a seat very narrowly. New York would have taken the seat if it had just 89 more people. If 89 more people in New York had responded to the census, New York would not have lost a seat. Minnesota would have. Texas is only gaining 2. They were thought they could gain 3, and Florida only gaining 1. They were thought they could gain 2. Rhode Island is not going to lose one of its House seats. It was expected to. And Arizona isn't going to gain a seat. It was expected to. Now, the biggest winners and losers, Montana is going to double its representation in the House, moving it from 3 to 4 Electoral College votes. Rhode Island will maintain its 4 Electoral College votes. West Virginia will lose one of its 5 Electoral College votes. New York is a loser. Florida is a winner. California is a loser. And then there's this, the thing that makes the left really, really mad. There's a shift to red states. In a closely divided House, the states that have full Republican control are making gains and will be able to draw lines that benefit the GOP. Now, there are population trends, but one of the things you need to understand is that the Republicans will benefit from drawing lines, and also, while there's a little bit of a mixed bag in the Electoral College, it does seem to help the Republicans. And this is from the Washington Post. As for the Electoral College in future presidential elections, it's a mixed bag. 2 states are losing seats, Michigan and Pennsylvania. They went for Biden in 2020, but for Trump in 2016. But those are states Democrats need to win in the near future, meaning it's probably a bigger loss for them. The best perspective might be how things have shifted in the Electoral College over time. If we reran the 2020 Electoral College with the new Electoral College votes, Biden's margin would have gone from 306 in the Electoral College to 303, which seems negligible. But if you overlay the 2000 presidential results on the current Electoral College goals, George Bush's narrow win of 271 Electoral College votes would have been a more decisive 290 Electoral College votes. That gives you a sense of where the trends are. That's the Democrats' biggest long-term challenge. Population shifting away from Democratic states to red states to Republican states. Now, here's the other thing. a lot of you are thinking out of the gate, I get this all the time from people, that essentially what's happening is Democrats are moving from Democrat states to Republican states, causing demographic shifts and shifts in party. In some states, that is true. Apple, for example, is opening a facility in North Carolina. It's going to open a corporate headquarters there. Apple, I think, is one of those companies that is very consciously playing electoral college games. Tim Cook is a political social activist. Moving Apple employees from California to North Carolina helps shift North Carolina. Amazon is doing the same thing with their headquarters in Nashville, making the Nashville area more Democrat. But in Texas and Florida, the people moving in are actually more conservative than the natives. In Texas, this is one of the things that a lot of people misunderstand. The Texas population growth has come from conservatives. If Texas had not seen the 4 million person increase in the last 10 years, Texas would probably be a Democrat state by now. The shifts in Texas and the suburbs have come from native Texans, not from those who have moved to Texas. They've moved to Texas because of Texas. The natives have gotten Yankified in Texas, and they're trending blue. They're trending Democrat. It's the people moving into Texas. The people moving into Texas are more likely to become gun owners. People moving into Texas are more likely to vote Republican. The people moving to Texas are more likely to want to preserve the every other year state legislature. The people who are moving to Texas are more likely to prefer no income tax. And same with Florida. No income tax in Florida has driven a lot of people who are upset with Democratic policies to Florida. Now, it's also a lot of rich people, but overwhelmingly, we now know from the census that a lot of the rich people who fled Manhattan actually didn't flee to Florida. They fled to Brooklyn, also in New York. Rich people moving out to Brooklyn. And in Florida, a lot of the people who are moving in are, it turns out, conservative. So it's not what a lot of people think. A lot of people think, oh, well, it's these Democrats. They're leaving their states. They're coming to our state. They're going to corrupt our state. In some cases, it's true. In Georgia, we've seen a lot of Fortune 500 companies. Under Sonny Perdue and Nathan Deal, a lot of Fortune 500 companies came into the state, and they brought employees from out of state to Georgia, and it shifted the political dynamics. But a lot of these states, Texas and Florida in particular, is people choosing to move there, and they're choosing to move there because they're conservative and they want to escape New York, Illinois, California. So don't make the population trends, and the media, of course, gets mixed up with this as well. Oh, well, we got people moving from California to Texas. They're going to turn Texas blue. It's only a matter of time. It's not actually true when you examine the data of the people moving into the state. So don't believe all of that you hear, and in fact, don't be afraid of people moving into your state. If you've got a strong state, a strongly Republican state, you got a dynamic governor like Ron DeSantis, or a culture of conservatism and guns in Texas like you have, a lot of people are drawn to that who are conservative, fleeing their states that are collapsing, and they're helping prop up the existing conservative base. Frankly, for those of us here in Georgia, where I am, we should take some lessons on this. We need to have more robust, aggressive conservatism to attract people into the state. Maybe get rid of the income tax. Go to a flat sales tax like Texas and Florida. Lure in some good conservatives and rebuild. Because my goodness, Republicans in Georgia seem intent on throwing away all of their historic gains.
He doesn't just have a radio show. Erick
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. I've got to wade in now with the census to controversial territory. I have one solution to what ails us as a society. It is not a comprehensive solution. It is not an omnibus plan for what ails us. It is one piece of what ails us. Our founders decided that we should be a republic and embrace a Roman-style representative democracy instead of a Greek-style direct democracy. So we elect individuals to go to Washington, D.C. to represent us. One of the original proposals in the Bill of Rights, in fact, it should have been the first of the Bill of Rights, was to increase the number of members of the House of Representatives as the nation grew and the population grew. And it provided a mathematical formula. And if you follow the mathematical formula, depending on how you interpret it, the House of Representatives would have between 4,000 and 6,000 people today. Now, that amendment is still out there. It failed to get the vote that it needed for ratification. It came up one vote short as they were passing around the Bill of Rights. So it didn't make it into the Bill of Rights, but it's still out there and could still be voted upon. I don't know that we need 6,000 members in the House of Representatives, but 1,000 wouldn't be a bad idea. 100 in the Senate, that's fixed in the Constitution, 2 senators per state, but then 1,000 members of the House of Representatives. I like that number. It's a round number. And I think at this point it's indisputable that we need more representatives to represent us in Washington, D.C. There are some people who say, well, that's just going to empower leadership more. No, I actually don't think it will. Leadership is already super empowered in Washington. Here's the problem. Right now, both parties engage in gerrymandering in the states they control to ensure that they get representation, and oftentimes they draw districts that do not represent communities of interest in order to preserve their power. If you add 1,000, if you raise the House of Representatives to 1,000 members, districts will be smaller and more compact and more likely to represent communities of interest. We went from a time in this country where everyone generally knew their member of Congress to a time when most people don't know their member of Congress. I live in Macon, Georgia. My member of Congress lives in South Georgia, about 2 hours from me. His part of the state is completely different from my part of the state. He never is here. He has an office, but he's never around. And it's not, and this isn't to pick on him. This is across the board. What it's like for members of Congress, whether it's in smaller population zones or the like. You don't get to know your member of Congress. Your member of Congress does not know your values, and your member of Congress oftentimes is drawn into a convoluted district where communities of interest are torn apart in order to preserve partisan gain. And that's always been the case, and that always will be the case. But if you add more members to the House of Representatives, bring it up to 1,000, those gerrymander districts shrink. And you're more likely to know your member of Congress. Therefore, your member of Congress is more likely to represent you. Additionally, it alleviates some of the bumps and hurdles in the Electoral College by boosting the number of Electoral College members. And in those states that do the Electoral College by district, spreads them out. I think we need to consider it. And listen, I'm a small government conservative. The idea of growing government, quite literally by growing Congress, should be anathema to me. But we've got a government right now that is run by lobbyists because there are so few members of Congress with so many complex issues, spread so thin over multiple committees. They don't really know what's going on. They abdicate to staff and to lobbyists, and government keeps growing. Adding members to the House of Representatives would at least empower more of them to take charge and claw back some of the power from lobbyists and staff. But also, I actually think it would undermine leadership. It's much harder to herd the cats when there are 1,000 of them than 435 of them. It allows them restructure the committees based on an influx of members. I think it's a good idea. I don't know that it'll happen, but it's a statutory issue now. It's not a constitutional issue. It's a statutory issue. If anything, I think maybe we should pick up the First Amendment, the Congressional Apportionment Amendment, and start getting it passed through states. We've got to expand the numbers of members of Congress. If we want to have a truly representative republic, as our founders intended, we need to continue to increase. James Madison authored the Congressional Apportionment Amendment because he believed that as the nation grew, we needed to keep representative democracy representative of the people who were going to be represented in Washington. And 435 members in a 331 million person country does not do that. We need more people in Congress. I know it's a crazy idea, but we need more members in Congress if we want a really representative democracy that actually reflects and represents us. Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. How are you? The phone number, if you want to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Y'all, I want to talk about a Silicon Valley company that you have probably never heard of. Their name is Basecamp. They make a product. It is a tool for working remotely. I actually like the company. It's kind of a CMS system, a customer management system, and it does a great job. I like it better than Slack, frankly. And I use Slack, but I prefer it. I prefer Basecamp, and part of me just would love to get my whole team using Basecamp. Basecamp essentially, it's a project management tool, but if you're familiar with Slack or Microsoft Teams or stuff, Basecamp is a little more productive, helps you be a little more organized, get your projects done. You can schedule stuff. You can do group chat. You can share documents and things like that. I genuinely like the program, and the company does a good job. They have, for example, an email service, hey.com, where you can get your email address and the like. I'm a fan of the company. It is one of the well-known woke companies in Silicon Valley. Basecamp has been on the bleeding edge of progressivism in Silicon Valley for some time. Its founders are rather progressive, but they've also kind of planted the flag in defiance of Silicon Valley all-in culture. And what I mean by all-in culture is you bring your entire life to the company. And they've decided at Basecamp that they're going to stop going to woke. And on Twitter, people are having a meltdown. I want to read you. This is from Jason Fried, one of the founders of the company. At Basecamp, we treat our company as a product. It's not a rigid thing that exists. It's a flexible, malleable idea that evolves. We aren't stuck with what we have. We can create what we want. Just as we improve products through iteration, we iterate on our company too. Recently, we've made some internal company changes, which taken in total collectively feel like a full version change. It deserves an announcement. In the product world, not all changes are enjoyed by all customers. Some changes are immediately appreciated. Some changes take time to steep, settle in, and get acquainted with. And to some changes never feel quite right. They may even be deal breakers. The same is true when changing your company, except that the customers are the employees. And when you get to a certain count, customers or employees or both, there's no pleasing everyone. You can't. There are too many unique perspectives, experiences, and individuals. As Huxley offers in The Doors of Perception, we live together. We act on and react to one another. But always and in all circumstances, we are by ourselves. The martyrs go hand in hand into the arena. They are crucified alone, embraced. The lovers desperately try to fuse their insulated ecstasies into a single self-transcendence. In vain. By its very nature, every embodied spirit is doomed to suffer and enjoy it in solitude. Heavy, yes, but insightful, absolutely. A relevant reminder we make individual choices. We all want different somethings. Some slightly different, some substantially. Companies, however, must settle the collective difference, pick a point, and navigate towards something lest they get stuck circling nowhere. With that, we wanted to put these directional changes on the public record. Historically, we've tried to share as much as we can for us and for you, so this transmission continues the tradition. Number one, no societal and political discussions on our company Basecamp account. Today's social and political waters are especially choppy. Sensitivities are at 11, and every discussion remotely related to politics, advocacy, or society at large quickly spins away from pleasant. You shouldn't have to wonder if staying out of it means you're complicit or wading into it means you're a target. These are difficult enough waters to navigate in life, but significantly more so at work. It becomes too much. It's a major distraction. It saps our energy and redirects our dialogue towards dark places. It's not healthy. It hasn't served us well. And we're done with it at our company Basecamp account where the work happens. People can take the conversations with willing coworkers to Signal, WhatsApp, or even a personal Basecamp account, but it can't happen where the work happens anymore. No more paternalistic benefits. For years, we've offered a fitness benefit, a wellness allowance, a farmer's market share, and continuing education allowances. They felt good at the time, but we've had a change of heart. It's none of our business what you do outside of work, and it's not Basecamp's place to encourage certain behaviors regardless of good intention. By providing funds for certain things, we're getting too deep into nudging people's personal, individual choices. So we've ended these benefits and, as compensation, paid every employee the full cash value of the benefits for this year. In addition, we recently introduced a 10% profit sharing plan to provide direct compensation that people can spend on whatever they'd like privately without company involvement or judgment. No more committees. For nearly all of our 21-year existence, we were proudly committee-free. No big working groups making big decisions or putting forward formalized groupthink recommendations. No bureaucracy, but recently a few sprung up. No longer. We're turning things back over to the person or people who are distinctly hired to make those decisions. The responsibility for DEI work returns to Andrea, our head of people ops. The responsibility for negotiating use restrictions and moral quandaries returns to me and David. A long-standing group of managers called Smart Counsel will disband. When we need advice or counsel, we'll ask individuals with direct, relevant experience rather than a predefined group at large. Back to basics. Back to individual responsibility. Back to work. No more lingering or dwelling on past decisions. We've become a bit too precious with decision-making over the last few years, either by wallowing in indecisiveness, worrying ourselves into overthinking things, taking on a defensive posture, and assuming the worst outcome is the likely outcome, putting too much energy into something that only needs a quick fix, inadvertently derailing projects when casual suggestions are taken as essential imperatives, or rehashing decisions in different forums or media. It's time to get back to making calls, explaining why once, and moving on. No more 360 reviews. Employee performance reviews used to be straightforward. A meeting with your manager or team lead, direct feedback, and recommendations for improvement. Then, a few years ago, we made it hard. Worse, really. We introduced 360s, which required peers to provide feedback on peers. The problem is peer feedback is often positive and reassuring, which is fun to read but not very useful. Assigning peer surveys started to feel like assigning busy work. Manager-employee feedback should be flowing pretty freely back and forth through the year. No need to add performance paperwork on top of that natural interaction. So we're done with the 360s too. No more reviews like that. Now, what's really going on here? There are a couple of things. Basecamp is a company in Silicon Valley that has never really embraced Silicon Valley culture. Google kind of set the standard for Silicon Valley companies in that Google did not pay as much as some companies, but offered impressive stock options so you had the chance to become a millionaire through stock growth, and gave extraordinary benefits, gyms, food service, car service, on and on and on. You had all sorts of, gourmet food and cars and you name it. And what Google was essentially doing is saying, you come work at Google and bring your whole self here. And you work 20 of 24 hours. You live here. We will provide for you as if we're your parents and pour your whole self into the company. Well, if they're pouring their whole self into their company, they're pouring their political opinions into the company. And Google over time got hyper woke. Because if you're asking someone to pour their whole self into the company and be there all the time, well, their interests, their outside work interests, get poured into it. And not only that, if they're pouring their whole self into it, they think that they are a part of it. And so they want to have a say in it, to shape it, to look more like them. We all want to shape things to look and reflect us. And so if you're giving your all to Google, you want Google to look like you. And the result is Google hired a bunch of people. They were progressive, secular, hyper-liberal, and Google, the company, began to take that on. And it became very unwelcoming to people who disagreed. It became very unwelcoming to anyone who might dissent. Google to this day is a hyper-woke company, not very receptive to conservatives. Its employees openly say they can shape the algorithm to provide information that reflects them, and they don't want it to reflect conservatives. So here comes this company, Basecamp, and it says, you know what, we're kind of done with that. Work is work. Work is different. We are a part of your life. We don't want to be all of your life. Leave work where it is. Work on the product. The product shouldn't reflect you. The product should reflect the product. Your political values have no relevance to the product. One of the owners of the company tweeted this out last year. Stop looking to work to fulfill every human emotional need. The reason you're so desperate to cast the company as a family is probably because you've been spending far too much time there. Get away from the office. Diversify your life. Let work just be one part of it. Now, here's the interesting thing here is in public, Basecamp is getting excoriated. Even some of their employees have announced they're leaving. If they can't get their political views aired at the office, they don't want to be at the office. It's not a family anymore. It was never supposed to be a family. These companies are not supposed to be a family. What Google and some of these major Silicon Valley companies did is they essentially moved people from their college campus to their corporate campus and left a lot of the amenities intact, so these people thought they were still at college. And instead of going to class, they were going to work. And Basecamp is essentially saying, we're grown-ups now. We're not going to baby you. We're not going to be your mom and dad. This is a business. People from different political persuasions like our product and use our product, and you don't get to say this person can't use it because you don't like their political views, and we don't care about your political views, and we're tired of you chatting about your political views at work when you're supposed to be working. More of this, please. Ben Thompson writes a newsletter, Stratechery. He's covering this today. One reason why this story is interesting, he writes, is that it is one of the most extreme examples I've seen of a complete bifurcation between public chatter on Twitter and private chatter in messages. The former is nearly universally critical, while the latter is nearly universally positive. In fact, the founders of the company say 95% of emails have been positive and 95% of tweets have been negative. Basecamp has defined itself in opposition to the Silicon Valley mindset. And one of its missions is to make it clear that startup culture becomes all-encompassing and people pour themselves into the business, including their political views, and it disrupts their work-life balance, and their work becomes their life, and therefore it must reflect their political views and everything else, and it is alienating and marginalizing to people. And they're right. I wonder if this is going to be a trend now. Because this company is a small company that you probably never heard of. But in the tech community, it's a really influential company. It's a massively influential company in the tech community. And for them to come out and say, we're done with woke at the office, that we're here to build a product, we're not here to pour our political views into it, it's going to be a wake-up. Now, some of them, Google probably never will. Facebook, maybe. Some of the others, possibly. But it's a big shake-up change of essentially saying, hey, we're all grown-ups now. Go live your life, come to the office, build the product, go home, and live the rest of your life. We don't want to be 24/7 your life. We don't want to reflect your life. We want to reflect our product. Pay attention to this. This could be a trend, and it would be a really good trend if it happened.
Honest news and conservative views.
Never separate.
Hello there. It's Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Speaking of the wokes, Simon & Schuster employees submit a petition demanding no deal with Trump administration authors. An employee petition at Simon & Schuster demanding that the company stop publishing authors associated with the Trump administration collected 216 internal signatures and several thousand outside supporters, including well-known black writers. The employees submitted the petition to senior executives at the publishing house, according to the company, and a person involved in the employee effort. The petition demands that the company refrain from publishing a memoir by former Vice President Mike Pence. The letter asks Simon & Schuster not to treat the Trump administration as a normal chapter in American history. Simon & Schuster Chief Executive Jonathan Karp sent an internal letter last week rejecting the employee demands when the company was aware the petition was circulating. It has now been formally submitted, and its spokesman for Simon & Schuster on Monday declined to comment. The 216 employees who signed the petition represent about 14% of Simon & Schuster's workforce. Among the more than 3,500 outside supporters, according to a letter accompanying the petition, were writers of color, including Jesmyn Ward, a two-time winner of the National Book Award for Fiction. A representative for Ms. Ward confirmed she signed the petition. The petition accused Mr. Pence of advocating for policies that were racist, sexist, and discriminatory towards LGBT people. Where's the Q? Among other criticisms of his tenure as a public official. The petition also calls on Simon & Schuster to cut off a distribution relationship with Post Hill Press, a publisher of conservative books as well as business and pop culture titles. A spokesman for Mr. Pence declined to comment. Post Hill Press publisher Anthony Zaccardi said, "We're proud of our publishing program and we're focused on it." The employee pushback against Mr. Pence's book underscores the challenges publishers face in releasing politically sensitive books that are commercially attractive. Fire them all. Fire them all. Seriously. Why keep these employees around? See, this goes back to the prior conversation. This isn't their company. It is not the employee company. They choose to work there. And they don't get to dictate the terms of that company. They do not get to dictate the projects the company works on. They flat out do not get to do that. And the fact that anyone would humor them and allow them to think that they have a say in that, they don't have to work there. I would fire them all. 215 employees of Simon & Schuster do not believe in the freedom of speech. They do not believe that they should be publishing a work by a former vice president of the United States. Fire them all. Send a signal. Yeah, it's 14% of the workforce. You'll be helping your budget. You'll be helping your shareholders. Fire them all. 216 internal signatures. Fire them. I don't care who they are. Fire them. If you can't handle, you're so sensitive, you can't handle publishing the memoir of the former vice president of the United States, you don't need to work there. This is what a group like Basecamp is heading off. By telling its employees that we're not your mom and we're not your daddy. We're not your society. We're not your community. We're your workplace. And we don't do politics at our workplace. We work at our workplace, and politics and our work aren't the same thing. They're going to have to do something. But we're going to see more of this unless corporations stand up to it. And my guess is that the trend is coming. In fact, when we come back, James Carville gave an interview. He was giving an interview about the first 100 days of Biden, and he broke off the interview and went after the wokes and how bad the wokes are for the Democrats. And here's the thing that Carville knows is true. By the way, I know James Carville. James and Mary are friends of mine, and Carville, when he speaks, whether you agree with him or not on stuff, you got to listen to him. Particularly, someone I know once said, you can ignore a lot of the partisan chatter until the partisan is speaking in their own house. When Republicans are being critical of the Republican Party, pay attention. When Democrats are being critical of the Democratic Party, pay attention. Everything else is just spin. When Carville talks about Republicans, you can tend to ignore it. But when Carville's talking about the Democrats, pay attention to how he says it. And when he's critical of the wokes and says most Democrats behind the scenes are critical of the wokes, but they're afraid of being canceled, you know the Democrats have a problem. One that he's willing to highlight. Is he now going to get canceled? My guess is they're going to try to cancel Carville, but also Carville flat out doesn't care. You're not actually going to be able to cancel a guy like James Carville. When we come back, the rise of the wokes in the Democratic Party is going to cause them problems. Carville knows it. I'll tell you what he said. Hello and welcome. It is Erick Erickson here. The Erick Erickson Show. The phone number, if you want to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. James Carville is speaking out about Democratic politics. Now, as I said in the last segment, you can disagree with James Carville on a lot of stuff. I know James, consider James a friend. We worked at CNN together for a number of years. We don't agree much on politics. And I go by the rule that I was taught by an old newspaper editor that you should never pay attention when a Republican talks about a Democrat or a Democrat talks about a Republican. You can pay little attention to it. But when a Republican talks about Republicans and a Democrat talks about Democrats, you should pay a great deal of attention to what they're saying, particularly someone of James Carville's stature. He gave an interview to Vox, where the woke kids write, and he writes, says wokeness is a problem. Let me read you how this begins. I called James Carville hoping to get his thoughts on President Joe Biden's first 100 days in office. He obliged. Then one question in, brushed aside the exercise to talk instead about why the Democrats might be poised to squander their political advantage against a damaged GOP. His failure to cooperate may have been for the best, since the 100 days ritual can sometimes lead to dull, dutiful analysis. What Carville offered up instead was a blunt critique of his own party, even after a successful 2020 election cycle, a sequel of sorts to his fulminations during last year's Democratic primaries. The longtime Democratic strategist is mostly pleased with Biden, but it's where much of the party seems to be going that has him worried. Wokeness is a problem, he said, and we all know it. According to Carville, Democrats are in power for now, but they also only narrowly defeated Donald Trump, a world historical buffoon, and they lost congressional seats and failed to pick up state legislatures. The reason is simple. They got a messaging problem. So let me get you here. This is the interviewer asks, what do you make of Biden's first 100 days? Carville. Honestly, if we're just talking about Biden, it's very difficult to find something to complain about. And to me, his biggest attribute is that he's not into faculty lounge politics. Faculty lounge politics? The interviewer asks. Here's Carville. You ever get the sense that people in faculty lounges in fancy colleges use a different language than ordinary people? They come up with a word like Latinx that no one else uses, or they use a phrase like communities of color. I don't know anyone who speaks like that. I don't know anyone who lives in a community of color. I know lots of white and black and brown people, and they all live in neighborhoods. There's nothing inherently wrong with these phrases, but this is not how people talk. This is not how voters talk. And doing it anyway is a signal that you're talking one language, and the people you want to vote for you are speaking another language. This stuff is harmless in one sense, but in another sense it's not. The interviewer. Is the problem the language or the fact that there are lots of voters who just don't want to hear about race and racial injustice? You can tell the reporter, I mean, they work for Vox, so they're woke. Carville, we have to talk about race. We should talk about racial injustice. What I'm saying is we need to do it without using jargony language that's unrecognizable to most people, including most black people, by the way, because it signals that you're trying to talk around them. This too cool for school BS doesn't work, and we have to stop it. There may be a group within the Democratic Party that likes it, but it ain't the majority. And beyond that, if Democrats want power, they have to win in a country where 18% of the population controls 52% of U.S. Senate seats. That's a fact. That's not changing. They want that's what this whole damn thing is about. Sounds like you have a problem with wokeness, James, says the interviewer. Carville, wokeness is a problem, and everybody knows it. It's hard to talk to anybody today, and I talk to lots of people in the Democratic Party who don't say this, but they don't say it out loud because they'll get clobbered or canceled. And look, part of the problem is that lots of Democrats will say that we have to listen to everybody and we have to include every perspective, that we don't have to run a ruthless messaging campaign. Well, you kind of do. It really matters. I always tell people that we got to stop speaking Hebrew and start speaking Yiddish. We have to speak the way regular people speak, the way voters speak. It ain't complicated. That's how you connect and persuade. And you have to stop allowing yourself to be defined from the outside. Take someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's obviously very bright. She knows how to draw a headline. In my opinion, some of her political aspirations are impractical and probably not going to happen. but that's probably the worst thing that you can say about her. Now take somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, the new Republican congresswoman from Georgia. She's absolutely loonier than a tune. We all know it, and yet for some reason the Democrats pay a bigger political price for AOC than Republicans pay for Greene. That's the problem in a nutshell, and it's ridiculous because AOC and Greene are not comparable in any way. So the reporter asked Carville what the solution is. That's why I'm doing this interview. Lots of smart people are going to read it, and hopefully they can figure out that which I can't. But if you're asking me, I think it's because large parts of the country view us as an urban, coastal, arrogant party, and a lot gets passed through that filter. That's a real thing. I don't give a damn what anybody thinks about it. It's a real phenomenon, and it's dampening the party brand. So the reporter says, part of the issue is that Republicans are going to paint the Democrats as cop-hating, fetus-destroying Stalinists, no matter what they say or do. So yeah, I agree the Democrats should be smart and not say dumb, alienating things, but I'm also not sure how much control they have over how they're perceived by half the country, especially when that half lives in an alternate media reality. Carville, right. But we can't say Republicans are going to call us socialists no matter what, so let's just run as all-out socialists. That's not the smartest thing to do. And maybe tweeting that we should abolish the police isn't the smartest thing to do because almost effing no one wants to do that. Here's the deal. No matter how you look at the map, the only way Democrats can hold power is to build on their coalition, and that will have to include more rural white voters from across the country. Democrats are never going to win a majority of these voters. That's the reality. But the difference between getting beat 80-20 to 72-28 is all the difference in the world. So they just have to lose by less. That's all. How is it we have all this talk about Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz, and we don't talk about Denny Hastert, the longest-serving Republican Speaker of the House in Congress? If Hastert was a Democrat who we knew had a history of molesting kids and was actually sent to prison in 2016, he'd still be on Fox News every night. The Republicans would never shut the hell up about it. So when Jim Jordan is pulling all these stunts with Anthony Fauci, why didn't someone jump in and say, let me tell you something, Jim, if Fauci knew what you knew, if he knew that a doctor was molesting young people, he would have gone to the medical board yesterday. You can go ahead and shut up. Jordan, by the way, denies all of this, you should know. But to the point, Carville is mad. He doesn't think Democrats are fighting enough. But he also doesn't think Democrats are fighting smart enough. Look at Florida. You now have Democrats saying Florida's a lost cause. Really? In 2018 in Florida, giving felons the right to vote got 64%. In 2020, a $15 an hour minimum wage, which we have no chance of passing federally, got 67%. Has anyone in the Democratic Party said maybe there's nothing wrong with the state of Florida? Maybe the problem is the kind of campaigns we're running? If you gave me an environment in which the majority of voters wanted to expand the franchise to felons and raise the minimum wage, I'd be able to win that. It's certainly not a political environment I'm destined to lose in. But in Miami-Dade, all they talked about was defunding the police and Kamala Harris being the most liberal senator in the U.S. Senate. If you look all across the Rio Grande Valley, we lost all kinds of solidly blue voters, and the faculty lounge BS is a big part of it. We won the White House against a world historical buffoon, and we came within 42,000 votes of losing. We lost congressional seats. We didn't pick up state legislature. So let's not have an argument about whether or not we're off key in our message. We are, and we're off because there's too much jargon and there's too much esoterica, and it turns people off. Carville, say what you will about James Carville. Carville knows his stuff. Undoubtedly, they're going to try to cancel him now because Carville's suggestion is you need rural white voters to vote Democrat. Let me read you one more comment here. Let me give you my favorite example of metropolitan overeducated arrogance. Take the climate problem. Do you realize that climate is the only major social or political movement that I can think of that refuses to use emotion? Where's the identifiable song? Where's the bumper sticker? Where's the slogan? Where's the flag? Where's the logo? We don't have it because with faculty politics, what you do is appeal to reason. You don't need the sloganeering and sound bites. That's for simple people. All you need are those timetables and temperature charts, and from that, everyone will just get it. That's not how the world works. That's not how people work. and Republicans are way more disciplined about taking a thing and branding it. Elites will roll their eyes at it, but I'd ask, how's that working out for you? Most people agree with us on health care and minimum wage and Roe v. Wade and even on the climate. So why can't we leverage it? Except they really don't. That's the problem here. James thinks that people do because he relies on the superficial polling. But when you dive deep and you ask people the probing questions, they really don't. Even on Roe v. Wade, a majority of Americans consider themselves pro-life. But what's so interesting here is that you got this reporter to some degree pushing back and say, well, the Republicans, they live in an alternate media universe. Here's the thing. Republicans have Fox News. Republicans have Fox News, and Democrats have everything else. They have CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS, PBS. They have the culture. They have the streaming services. They have the movie houses. They have the TV studios, the movie production companies, the authors, the newspapers. And yet, they're barely hanging on to power. If you look at where the Democrats are complaining, you see what's going on here. They are aware that more and more average run-of-the-mill voters are tuning those things out. So they want to censor Facebook. They want conservatives off Twitter. They want Fox News shut down. They want to turn off talk radio. They want the government to shut down talk radio. What the left is trying to do is shut down means of communication that bypass them, that bypass their forum. The conservative message, it's remarkable that conservatives are winning at all. But like Carville points out, Republicans are winning places like Florida to the extent that Democrats are now saying we can't win in Florida anymore. Republicans are winning in states and in Congress in ways Democrats suggest they shouldn't be able to. Yes, they lost the presidency. It wasn't stolen. It was that the voters decided they got tired of Trump. But the voters got tired of the wokes too. So they went with the alternative. And part of the problem here, something that Carville can't quite put his finger on, is that the media is the Democrats' own worst weapon. Because the clip of Ali Velshi on MSNBC went viral as him standing in front of a burning pile of rubble, saying it was a mostly peaceful protest. Having the emotional reaction from the pundits on CNN to the George Floyd situation and wanting to defund the police. See, the Democrats think that most people agree with that stuff, and they don't. And Carville understands that. The faculty lounge politics stuff. They think people agree with them, and they really don't. They're in their own bubble. Carville says that Republicans have portrayed the Democrats as a coastal, elite, arrogant party of out-of-touch people. That's actually what the Democratic Party has become. You got Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer in charge of it, with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. You've got the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes who get extraordinary media coverage. They're a bunch of coastal elites. They're out to lunch on this stuff. It's consuming the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party can't be more liberal than Joe Manchin. That's a fact. We don't have the votes. But I'll say this. Two of the most consequential political events in recent memory happened on the same day in January. The insurrection of the U.S. Capitol and the Democrats winning those two seats in Georgia. Can't overstate that, but the Democrats can't screw it up. They have to make the Republicans own the insurrection every day. They have to pound it. They have to call bookers on cable news shows. They have to get people to write op-eds. There have to be all kinds of investigations and stories dripping out. God knows how long, and the Democrats should spend every day tying all of this to the Republican Party. They can't sit back and wait for it to happen. Just imagine if it was a bunch of non-white people who stormed the Capitol. Imagine how the Republicans would exploit it. Whatever you think the Republicans would do to us in that scenario, that's exactly what the hell we need to do to them. But there's another fatal problem here. Voters may have tied that to Donald Trump. They may blame Donald Trump. You may not, but your average voter might. But they don't tie it to the GOP. And they're not going to. people tend to like their individual congressman. Their individual congressman tends to be Republican or is about to be Republican, and they're not blaming that guy for an insurrection he wasn't at and played no part in. It's going to be harder than Carville imagines, and in part it's going to be harder because the Democrats are out to lunch on the woke issues. They don't understand it because their loudest voices all agree with it, which means it's going to be harder and harder for them to win, and that's a good thing.
News and in-depth analysis.
So Politico is a Washington political news shop, and it's a newspaper website. It was founded essentially to cover all the politics in Washington in a deeper dive than a lot of other places. Over time, it's become increasingly progressive. I mean, it was always run by Democrats, but more so progressive these days than ever before. In fact, just last week, they instructed their staff to stop referring to the border crisis as a crisis. Can't have that. Can't have the truth being told. It reads that the benefit of reading Politico these days is almost that it has become a internal conversation among Democrats. You get that sense from this story. Headline: Liberal push to expand Supreme Court is all but dead among Hill Democrats. And then the subtitle is more instructive. Senate Republicans are still seizing on the issue in the lead up to the 2022 midterms. Supreme Court expansion was one of the left's most galvanizing ideas during the 2020 Democratic primary, but the idea is going nowhere with sitting Democratic senators. I don't think the American public is interested in having the Supreme Court expanded, said Michael Bennet of Colorado. Senator Mark Kelly, who represents a particularly valuable swing state, said the most responsible thing to do is keep it at 9 justices. And Catherine Masto of Nevada says she opposes adding seats that politicize the court. The trio is facing re-election in 2022, making their opinions particularly important to Chuck Schumer. But as Ed Markey formally pushes for high court expansion, resurfacing the popular progressive cause in response to the GOP's relentless drive to fill court seats during the Trump years, it's clear that few of Markey's colleagues agree with them. While liberal measures on election reform, police bias, and congressional ethics remain relatively popular with the 50-member Senate majority, expanding the Supreme Court is close to dead among the chamber's Democrats. This is in the category of things that couldn't muster 50 votes and probably couldn't muster 40 votes, says Brian Schatz of Hawaii. We have a historic opportunity to make change here, and we should focus on those issues. Sherrod Brown said adding seats is a topic that the media Republicans like to talk about, but one that's got no traction in the Senate. Somebody introduced a bill. We're focused on COVID. Don't you love how they're doing it and how the Politico is running cover for them? All of these Democrats were hot and bothered about adding seats to the Supreme Court till the polling came out. A majority of Democratic voters in the country are opposed to adding seats to the Supreme Court. And suddenly the Democrats said, we weren't even taking it seriously. They weren't even taking it seriously. They were taking it seriously until they weren't taking it seriously. They were taking it seriously. They introduced the legislation. You had poor old Hank Johnson over there in the House of Representatives. They did a big rollout of it. It was all the rage. You had Democrats and Republicans together out there pushing the issue. And then suddenly it's, my bad. We don't really want to do it. Now that the polling has come out, I mean, here's Ed Markey.
As a result, we have a stilted, illegitimate 6-3 conservative majority on the court that has caused this crisis of confidence in our country. The Republicans stole 2 seats on the Supreme Court, and now it is up to us to repair that damage. Our democracy is in jeopardy today because the Supreme Court's standing is sorely damaged.
Sorely damaged, Markey says. And here's Hank Johnson, congressman from Georgia.
The real outlier is the fact that the court hasn't changed while the rest of the federal government has grown, keeping pace with the growth of the nation.
You got Democrats in the House and the Senate who support the idea until the polling comes out. And they're like, oh, my gosh, no, we're opposed. This is ridiculous that they're now walking it all back. And now you got Politico helping them say, we're not really serious about this idea. You were always serious until the polling blew up in your face. That's why you're scrambling on education as well now. Hi there, it's Erick Erickson here. The phone number 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Progressives are really outraged at Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson, in a monologue last night, essentially said, if you see someone having their kid in a mask outside, you should call child welfare or call the police or tell them that's child abuse. Take the mask off your head. How can Tucker Carlson do this? Listen, conservatives are not progressives. We should not be going up to people and harassing them about their kids. But isn't that the point of what Tucker was actually doing here and the reaction to it? For a year, we have seen progressives harass people not wearing masks. We've seen the bully mobs of people with their cell phone cameras going up to individuals and shaming them for not wearing a mask. And the left said nothing about it, really. I mean, progressives to some degree encouraged the shaming of people not wearing masks. So here comes Tucker Carlson and says, the science actually says you don't need to wear a mask outside. And kids have a minimal risk of getting COVID, and if they get it, they're going to be fine. It's child abuse to make your kid outside in the hot summer sun wear a mask. They don't need to wear a mask. You do something about it. And the very same people, the Karens of the left who are shoving cameras in people's faces, trying to shame them on the internet for not wearing a mask, are suddenly outraged that Tucker Carlson would suggest that conservatives should do the same. Outraged. How? I can't believe it. This is you got conservatives calling 911 on people wearing masks. One, I highly doubt anyone is actually going to do that. Two, they shouldn't do that. But three, where was all the outrage when progressives were doing it to people? Where was that outrage? Because there sure was a lot of it. We've all seen the videos of the Karens of the world shaming old men, women, and children for daring to not wear a mask. We've seen the passive-aggressive, fretful stories of, I passed someone on the road and they weren't wearing a mask and I may die now. We've seen all of that hysteria from the left. And now they don't like it when the tables are turned on them, that now they want to curl up in the fetal position and cry. I don't think anyone should do that. You should never approach someone's child and say your parents are committing child abuse because you are wearing a face mask. That's stupid. Leave people alone. But the left was perfectly fine to do it on their terms, and they don't like the table turned on them. And if anything, I don't think Tucker Carlson was seriously encouraging people to do it. I think he knew it would provoke the reaction it has provoked from the left, and it sure as hell has from the very same people who are demanding we all wear masks and calling the cops on us for not doing so. That's actually shows why they hate Tucker Carlson. He is brilliant at exposing their hypocrisies by provoking reactions from them he knows he's going to provoke. The whole thing is ridiculous, though. I'm not a progressive. I don't intend to behave like a progressive. I don't intend to behave like one of those people who's going into places and demanding certain behaviors. I'm not. I just refuse to get in people's faces and shame them for what they've done. I refuse to get in people's faces and do that sort of stuff. I'm not going to do it. I just refuse to bully and badger people about stuff like that. I don't think you should. But it's frustrating that the left would for a year do that to us, and now Tucker Carlson suggests we turn the tables over. Oh my God, you can't do that to me. Whatever. All right, I got to move on. Kids are finally returning to school, but most of them are white. President Joe Biden is on the verge of meeting his 100-day pledge to press the majority of American schools into reopening for 5 days of weekly in-person instruction But there's a problem. Most of the kids returning to classes are white. Minority students are most likely to be missing out in in-person learning, despite assurances of classroom safety under CDC guidelines and outreach to local and state school districts. It's a key challenge facing Biden as he moves beyond his first months in office, and one the administration insists it is prepared to tackle. Dramatic demographic and geographic divides over in-person learning have emerged in the United States since the beginning of the year, according to estimates from the Education Department's research arm and data from independent trackers. 80% of public schools were open for at least some in-person learning by the end of February, according to a government survey. But an estimated 78% of Asian 8th graders were learning in a fully remote environment. Nearly 60% of Black and Hispanic 8th graders were learning from home full-time. That's despite a White House-led push to inoculate millions of educators against COVID-19, the Biden administration's close relationships with teachers' unions, a growing number of reopening schools, and signs of public optimism about a return to normal classes this fall. A central concern is that families of color are choosing to opt out. On a good day, we're not inclined to trust the system because many of us have gone through that system and aren't really trustful of what's going on in classrooms, says Carrie Rodriguez, founding president of the National Parents Union Advocacy Organization. You can't really blame parents of color for saying, you know what, I'm not ready to re-engage with the system yet. All of this mistrust is really well earned. Okay. This is really actually kind of funny to me. You've got left-wing interest groups who've been fighting to keep schools closed. And now that they've kind of given in, you've got left-wing interest groups fighting to keep kids out of school. Nationwide, 52% of white 4th graders were back inside public schools full-time by the end of February, according to the latest estimates from the government. 69% of Black, Hispanic, and Asian 4th graders were enrolled. Between 54 and 69% were enrolled in remote instruction. So you got parents who are opting to keep their kids home, but also in a lot of places, it's the white kids who are in private school. And it's the Black and Hispanic kids who aren't. They're in public schools that are having a real hard time opening. The guidelines are nebulous. I got to tell you, our kids' school has finally dropped the mask mandate. That COVID cases are so low. We haven't had any incidents in the school for some time. That they've stopped temperature checks and they've stopped masks. It's a real tangible sign of progress in our kids' school. But not all kids in not all schools are in that situation. There are a lot of public school systems in the country that haven't opened. Some are only just now opening, and that's staggering to me. My kids started school in August. They left school early for Christmas because of the post-Thanksgiving surge in cases. That they shut down early. About a week earlier, they had a 3-week Christmas break instead of a 2-week Christmas break. The high school students went on remote learning for a week. My kids' school has been very hands-on about COVID. My kids' school has done what you would expect a competent school district would do. They have constantly provided us information. They have been mindful of the rumor mill at school, and when the rumor mill gets going about, oh, did you know so-and-so has COVID or something, they've sent home very detailed, without violating people's privacy, they've sent home detailed information. Here's what we know, or this isn't true. Here's what actually happened. They've been very approachable if we've had concerns. They've required masks in school. They forced the issue with some people who didn't want to wear them. They made them wear it. They've been mindful to instruct families that you may not be impacted, but your kids could cause other kids to carry it home and get people with vulnerable families sick. That we've got to love our neighbors. We got to be good neighbors. We got to make sure we understand it's not just us, it's them as well. We got to take a whole health approach to this. They've been very deliberative. For 1 week, the high school shut down and went to remote learning because of cases. They went to they left school a couple of days early for Christmas because of cases, but they've monitored, they've kept us informed the entire way, and they finally got to the point and said, you know what? Cases are so low now. We've had so few instances of the virus. We don't need masks anymore. We don't need temperature checks. But they have done so with a very informed approach, a very methodical approach. You couldn't ask for a better school than what our kids have gone through. And by the way, yes, our kids go to a private Christian school, but the public schools could be doing that as well. It's a choice to not do that. It's a choice to not be that engaged with the parents. And I dare say one of the major differences is that we made a fundamental choice to pay tuition and send our kids to a school where we are, to a degree, not treated just as them as students and we as parents, but as customers of a school system. And in many public schools today, they don't treat you that way. You're just there. They are a public service, and you can choose to use the public service or not. And whether you choose to use it or not, you still have to pay for it. There are no expectations of improvement because there's no need to improve. Now, some public school systems are more responsive than others. And where I live in Georgia, a lot of the public school systems have been more responsive than in some areas of the country where school board members are just abstract. You don't know them, you don't see them, you don't interact with them. The school system administration is bureaucratic, and it is not a customer service situation. It is your taxpayer dollars go to prop up the school, whether you like it or not, screw you. It's a very cold and abstract position. That's one reason, frankly, I'm in favor of school choice. You bring in school choice, and those public schools are going to have to compete to have kids. I mean, just think about all the work my kids' school went into to make my kids safe. They didn't have to do that, but they did it because of that relationship, and they wanted to get the school back open. There are a lot of public schools, even here in Georgia where I am, particularly in the metro Atlanta area, that did not do any of that stuff because they didn't have to. They could just put everyone on remote learning. But remote learning is no substitute to in-person learning. I cannot tell you, I realize that I have a level of advantage because of income that I can do this, but if I didn't have the income I had, I would scrape, I would get a second job, I would do what I could to get my kid into get my kids into the school they're in now, instead of putting them in a public school system. There are some good public school systems. I don't mean to disparage generally public school systems. I think that in my area, the elementary school systems are pretty good, but I think it's very notable the number of friends I have who are public school teachers in high schools in my area who tell me they themselves send their kids to private school or would much prefer it. Or many of them send their kids to a different county school where they live, and then they work in this county. That's a pretty damning indictment from the teachers within the school system that they send their kids elsewhere. You, as a parent, have an obligation to be hands-on with your kids' education and their values. You're not raising little automatons who learn to think for themselves. You guide them. You steer them and you shape them. And you will steer and shape them, or other cultural forces will. And thankfully, we've put our kids in a place where the cultural forces of the school reflect our values. And when we're not there, they're still being shaped in a way we choose. It takes hard work to raise good kids. You know, I'm a Calvinist. I'm God's will be done here. It's like talking to Tim Keller. He was talking about friends of his who he thought were better parents than him, and their kids had bigger issues growing up than his kids did. And all he can say is, that's why I'm a Calvinist. Listen, God's will be done here, but you got to play a role. And the state right now says it's going to play a role. You can be hands off, let the state take care of it. The state's not taking care of it. And this is causing all sorts of future issues for kids in school because, I mean, what about the 56 to 60% of black kids who are not in public schools right now? Their education is not nearly as good as in-person learning. Many of them, it's been parental choice. Oftentimes it's not. They've got no choice because the school system won't open, and they're going to fall further and further behind. When are we going to get to the point where people start saying, well, we got to do further bailouts now because kids, we failed them during the pandemic. 20 years from now, they can't get a good job. They never got the college degree because they didn't finish school because they dropped out. This is nuts. We got to do better as a society. You've got to do better as parents. We all got to do better as parents. And if your local school system will not reopen, it's time to throw out your school board and get a new school board. It's time to rise up at the polls. And this is going to be an issue, not to get super political here, but this is an issue that's going to hurt Democrats nationwide, frankly, in large part because it is Democrat-backed school boards that are the ones refusing to open, despite the overwhelming evidence about at this point that it is safe to do so. They're refusing to and making inordinate demands on local communities to get the schools open, and they're flat out not doing it. And some of them are even harassing parents who have dared to get their kids private education while the school systems are closed. That's not a sustainable model for Democrats to seek a path back into power in this country. And a lot of them know it. It's kind of what James Carville was getting at. The faculty lounge politics of the day don't translate well with voters.
News and in-depth analysis.
Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Well, this is a funny way for the media to report a story. Speaking of education, Virginia, for racial equity purposes, decided to get rid of AP classes. Now they're saying, oh, we're not actually going to get rid of AP classes. And the media, of course, is rushing to fact check it. Facing attacks from right-wing pundits and scrutiny from lawmakers, Virginia's superintendent of public instruction said on Monday the state is not eliminating advanced high school mathematics courses. Superintendent James Lane said the Virginia Department of Education is in the early stages of a regularly scheduled revision of its mathematics standards of learning, which guide school systems and their course offerings across all areas of instruction. As part of that revision process, which takes place every 7 years, state officials recently began workshopping some ideas as to how Virginia could teach mathematics in a way that better prepared children for colleges and workforces. The idea, detailed online as part of a program called the Virginia Mathematics Pathways Initiative, includes rejiggering 8th, 9th, and 10th grade math courses to place a greater emphasis on fields, including data science, data analytics. Schools would still offer traditional courses, but those courses would now incorporate stronger foundations in data analytics. And the content might blend a little, so algebra could be a little bit of geometry and the like. But here's the thing. One of the proposals that kind of got buried by the media is that they want to get rid of AP classes in the name of equity. That's right, because minority students are less likely to take AP classes. It gives white students an advantage. And so they want to eliminate advanced classes in order to make it equitable for Black and Hispanic students. And it was put in writing. It was put in writing that it was for equity purposes. And now Virginia said, it was just a suggestion. We're just looking at it. And of course, the media is circling back. They're never going to do this. It was just somebody's suggestion. It's not real. It's not real now because they got caught. This more and more happens. It's kind of like the Biden administration and the beef stuff. You got Epicurious magazine saying no more beef recipes. It's bad for global warming, bad for the environment to promote cows. You got the Biden administration saying we got to cut emissions 50% in the next decade. And you got a research report coming out of the University of Michigan saying one easy way to do it is to get rid of cows. And the Biden administration, no, it's not us. It was just the researchers. No, we would never make that wackadoo suggestion. No way. And yet they want to drive up the costs to make it reality without actually acknowledging it as the reality. This is what they do. They deny it when caught, say it's not really true, and you're just believing the right-wing media. It's all fake news. When no, actually, there are many, many kernels of truth to it being real, except you got caught. And you know you can't sustain it. You know you can't acknowledge it, and you know you can't defend it now that you've gotten caught. Vigilance is a key here. And we're going to see this for the next 4 years. We're going to see this recurring pattern of the media saying, no, this is all made up by the Republicans. This isn't really true. And time again, what it actually is and what's actually going to happen is that it is true, it is real, and they are denying it because they got caught. And I would rather them have to deny it and say it's not true and it's all Republican lies and have us catch it and expose it than have us not catch it. And they think that what's going to happen is people will just stop believing the conservatives for pointing it out. But we all know better because we know this stuff is what they want to do. We know they would love to ban beef and automobiles and everything else to get their global agenda for climate change. But the more we expose them, the more they've got to deny it all. And I'm fine with